All right, so here we've got 1983's Cujo, a film based on the Stephen King novel of 1981. It's the tale of a rabies-infected Saint Bernard who turns into a puss and blood-soaked murder dog and tries to munch on anyone who gets in his eye line. It was written by King at the height of his alcoholism, and I think he was probably nose deep in cocaine at the time also, and directed by Lewis Teague, who was no stranger to animals gone wrong movies, which I'll discuss in a little bit. Now, it's an odd movie, this, because its brief IMDb synopsis says that Cujo conducts a reign of terror on a small American town, which isn't really accurate. But what the film does offer is quite an intense, confined study of suffering for your sins, which I'll explain. Let's take a look. Now, I've not read the Stephen King novel that Cujo's adapted from, so this review's solely for the film. And it's a film I've not watched for a couple of decades until recently, and I think I remembered it quite differently. So the titular Cujo is a Saint Bernard dog owned by a grumpy mechanic, Joe Camber, here played by Ed Lauter, who lives out of town on a remote farm. And whilst chasing a rabbit, Cujo sticks his nose into a hole and's bitten by a bat, and thus becomes infected with rabies, I guess, which quickly makes him sick and ultimately murderous. Now, just away from the farm in town live a couple with a small child, the mother of which is Donna Trenton, played by E.T.'s Dee Wallace. Now, when it's found she's been having an affair with the local handyman, her husband leaves town, leaving her and their young son Tad with a broken car that they manage to take to the local farm just before it breaks down for good.
Oh, I think we've arrived, Tanner.
Yeah, but is anybody home?
And this is where the synopsis is a tad misleading, because Cujo doesn't run amok across town necessarily. The film takes place almost entirely on the farm, with the mother and son trapped in their car as a giant bloodthirsty canine stalks them, just like that shark from Jaws. Now, I'm torn a little here because I enjoy the feeling of isolation and helplessness the film mostly provides, but I also would like to have seen a version of the story where Cujo does munch his way through a load of townsfolk like a canine slasher movie. Now, it's not that kind of film, and that might put a lot of people off. We actually have to wait a little bit till about the halfway point of the movie, I think, before we get our first kill, meaning there's a good chunk of family drama intercut with scenes of poor Cujo whimpering and growling as he gets progressively ill and bad-tempered thanks to the rabies raging through his body. Now, apparently King himself said the themes of the film were about addiction and its destructive powers, but rewatching it recently, I feel it's a morality tale about sinful behaviour being punished. So take Ed Lauter's character, for instance. Now, he's obviously awful to his family. In the few brief scenes that we get, we see his ill-treated wife has won $5,000 on the lottery, which him and his loser buddy are planning to spend on a guy's trip, I think. So there's no surprise regarding their fates. But I love the little moment preceding this in the film where Lauter's wife, apparently packing to go see her sister for a few days, secretly packs a family photo album, signalling her trip will be a little bit more permanent than she's letting on. And then there's, of course, at the centre of the film, Dee Wallace's unfaithful wife and mother, trapped in a broken car on a remote farm with a huge dog that won't let her leave alive, surely being dragged through the ringer as punishment and penitence for her behaviour. And whether that's the intention or not, it does provide some effective thrills. The dog, or dogs, because apparently 5 different dogs played Cujo, go head-to-head with Dee Wallace as the best actors in the film. The poor creature's being covered in some truly disgusting makeup throughout the movie. And the attack scenes are truly menacing, although you will spot Cujo's tail wagging in a few shots, something the production apparently tried to solve by tying down the dog's tail for the most part. I'll be honest, I thought the dog's gradual descent into illness was more depressing than terrifying, the poor devil. Guys, just before we go on, if you've made it this far into the video, firstly, thank you. But also, thanks for being here and supporting the channel. It would mean a great deal to me if you could hit that thumbs up button below the video. And if you are a fan of films like this, classic horror or classic films in general, subscribing to the channel really helps me out and gets these videos seen by as many people as possible. Thank you. Now back to Cujo. So Dee Wallace, bless her, loved a good creature feature. She was in The Howling in 1981 and Critters in 1986, but she'll probably always be remembered as Elliot's mum in E.T. Here she's a great sport, suffering as she's trapped with her son with no food and very little water in a baking sun for what I think is a few days. Not only is she contending with a savage animal, but also has to care for a young boy who's the first to suffer the effects of hunger and dehydration. Another plot mechanic that raises the stakes and makes that house and telephone that's about 50 yards away seem ever more just out of reach. Wallace is realistically hysterical for most of the runtime, her patience and survival instincts tested when she finally goes toe-to-toe with Cujo in a dizzying baseball bat face-off. So Cujo was directed by Lewis Teague, who had previously made 1980s Alligator and would go on to make Cat's Eye. So he was no stranger to animal-centric movies. Here he puts together some effective jump scares and manages to film a series of dog attacks that are mostly convincing, although maybe not as scary and gore-filled as I remembered. He also puts together a dazzling post-dog attack 360-degree inside the car shot that's a bit of a flex, but works really well.
Don't get out of the car.
So yeah, in the conversation of Stephen King adaptations, I think this is mostly faithful, or at the very least, King approved. Such was King's popularity at this time that this is one of 3 film adaptations of his work released in 1983 alone, the other 2 being The Dead Zone and Christine. It's got a strong performance by Wallace and the young Danny Pintauro, who create a realistic mother-son dynamic, convincing rabies-soaked, gloopy creature effects, and also nasty down and outs getting their comeuppance courtesy of cinema's second favourite St. Bernard. Obviously the first one's Beethoven. Go check it out.